Hi everyone, Hunter here. Only a small portion of the population reads for pleasure. I disagree with many of the studies that would place this number at nearly 50% due to how they define reading and other flawed metrics that seem to stat pad for the publishing industry. I have a more rigorous standard. I may enjoy my doom scrolls through Reddit, where I consume a tremendous amount of garbage and useless facts, but I would never claim this as a reading session. It'd be as if I watched TikTok all day and then claimed I watched an episode of television. Yes, in both examples, I engaged in the most diluted version of the medium, but did I engage with the art? One more example for good measure. You ate Oreos for dinner, but would you count that as a real meal, or are you still lacking nutrition? Across YouTube, I find videos that seem to be targeted toward the procrastinator, who may authentically believe, with just the right push, that they will flourish into a vigorous reader. I doubt this. Instead, I believe the true audience of these benefits of reading videos to be readers who want a bit of self-congratulation. They bask in the superior brain function over the moronic, non-reading plebs who surround their existence. Well, I stand before you and proclaim my guilt. In fact, I would like to add to this masturbatory subgenre with a take of my very own. Read a book, gain a thought. As time progresses, your memory of anything fades and bends. Stories are no exception, even if we wish they were. I would wager if you were reading a particularly thick book that by the end, unless you took extensive notes, you already have forgotten a great many details of the early story. Perhaps this is a flaw in the human condition that you have already identified and implemented a plan to minimize the aspects of. But even then, I know every time you reread your favorite book, events unfold differently than you remember. So let me grab some examples for you. Oh, there's going to be spoilers, duh. First example is Ringworld by Larry Niven. Humans were selectively bred by aliens to be lucky. That's like the whole thing I took from it, is that you can selectively breed for luck. Isn't that such an interesting concept? I have Necromancer by William Gibson. What I took from this is basically that the movie The Matrix completely ripped this off. Like, I kind of want to call The Matrix an adaptation. I don't even know. Inspired by is like pushing it. This is literally The Matrix. Okay, so I have a classic here, the Foundation trilogy from Isaac Asimov in the Everyman Library. If you can ever get your hands on these, I would recommend them over any other collections. They do a really good job. These are good quality books. But that aside, what I took from this was the Darth Jar Jar theory has credibility if you examine it from Lucas's perspective on how big of a fan he was of these books. Like, you can see how people made the leap to try to justify the odd Jar Jar character and the weird bandage between episode 1 and episode 2 of Star Wars. So basically, this book is just about how guns are OP, and once guns were introduced, it's whoever has the superior technology is going to win, right? It's all about range weapons. So I went through a Civil War phase in the last few years. Probably read like 12 to 15 books on the topic, but I'm just going to grab a few. Seguin, Hymns of the Republic. This book is the story of the final year of the American Civil War. The South wanted the slaves. It's not really a debate. Rebel Yell. This was on Stonewall Jackson. I think Stonewall Jackson was autistic. And once again, basically they were fighting for slavery. Short history of Reconstruction should be required reading in any AP history class in high school across the country. Basically, all the current political issues seem to stem from essentially Lincoln getting assassinated and not being able to put the country back together properly. This is a really depressing read if you are able to connect the dots and see how things in the past are affecting us currently. This is The Rise of Kyoshi and the Shadow of Kyoshi. If you're an Avatar Universe fan, these are amazing. The comics for Korra and Aang are both trash. I really wish they were like half the quality of these books. FC Yi is a tremendous writer. What I take away from this is, beyond the comics being trash, is that for some reason in the Avatar universe, anytime the Avatar and Team Avatar fights a single bender, it seems that they get overpowered. It makes no sense. The Avatar is the strongest person in the whole universe, right? And they get destroyed almost every fight. This has been really annoying me with Korra because Korra is my favorite Avatar, but it happens consistently in these books as well. It's very frustrating. This is Blind Sight by Peter Watts. I found out that I'm not really into vampires. Basically, my takeaway is that anytime I read anything for vampires, I just can't get into it. I don't know why. Something about them turns me off. The only thing I really enjoy is maybe Blade. The Princess Bride. What's the takeaway from The Princess Bride? I think it's just that stories should be pleasurable, right? To me, it feels like something that's not taking itself too seriously, and it still holds up. This is a book you can read to your children. This is a book you can write a thesis on, and it's just pleasurable. Like, there's no reason to punish yourself with books that you don't enjoy. I have the first 4 of the X series, the X Heroes, a novel. It's always fascinating when you like read a screenwriter transition into novels. It doesn't always work. This book, it's fun. I have issues with it. But yeah, my takeaway isn't so much from the book as it is that transition from screenwriter to novelist. Don't judge a book by its cover. I read this my sophomore year of college. Perhaps it was my junior year. I just chose it on a whim. I had like a list to select from, and I was like, whatever, I'll just read this. This book is amazing. It is so good. I don't think the author sold that many copies of this, but I really wish that this was a bigger book. Maybe it's grown since. I haven't really checked in since college, but when I was in college, I think this had like 10 reviews on Amazon at most. Oh, here, as you can see, I have a ton of notes in Revolutionary Suicide. To be honest, I do not remember a single one of what these notes could be. They're probably a bunch of quotes. My takeaway from this book that I just can't remember off the top of my head is just that Huey P. Newton was I have a couple things. So one, Huey P. Newton was clearly a very intelligent individual that was very full of himself. He constantly throughout this book will talk about how he outsmarted everyone. And he's like, oh, well, that was impossible because I derived this from this. And he's very into his own legend before he was a legend. Yeah, and there's a honesty here, but it feels like the honesty of a narcissist. But I am a big fan of Huey P. Newton after this. I don't know. It feels like he could be lying to you at portions of the book, but I'm going to go with his story over the police. But this is an amazing book. Clearly, I loved it. I know there's some quotes on religion in here that I found super interesting that I sent to my brother, but I can't recall what they were off the top of my head. That's why we have to use these little sticky notes. Frankenstein, and I love this Barnes & Noble copy, leather. Look at this fancy red. This is maybe my favorite book of all time. Well, it's top 3. I think The Hobbit's my favorite book of all time. I mean, what's the takeaway from Frankenstein? There's so much to say. I guess humans aren't meant to be God. We are not creators. We should not try and trifle in that land. I don't know. I think we could pull it off, but didn't work well here. And I see this in a lot of things. You can see it in Game of Thrones and various other books, that there is an interesting dynamic with the oldest brother, right? Spoiler. Something about the oldest brother story dynamic seems to be the most powerful. I don't know what it is. I think the responsibility of the father drops down to the oldest brother. And then from there, the oldest brother essentially is acting as the father once the father leaves. It's an interesting thing that happens in a ton of stories. And even in real life, like I've seen it. Stephen King, takeaway from this is the train scene. I mean, when I look at this book, I can't think about anything but that. That is a disturbing scene and probably the only thing that scared me in this book. Feels very inappropriate. Yeah, I don't know. When I think of this book, I just think of the train scene. I can't really get over it. I have no idea why he wrote that, how he wrote that, how that stayed in. I've read the justification for it online, and I think it's very weak. I'm not a big fan of that. So, yeah. Related to this, actually, with this It scene is the Song of Achilles, which I would actually pair up kind of well with It, in that the first third of this book, approximately, before we get into the War of Troy, makes me very uncomfortable. If you've read this book, you might disagree with me, but if you know what I'm talking about, I think things are too detailed. It's always an odd thing for me. I don't know. If you guys have seen Moonlight, I kind of have the same issue where I understand it's like the coming of age story, but there's like a sexualization of youth that is uncomfortable as an older viewer, if that makes sense. Even if it rings true, it's not necessarily something like I want to see or read about in such detail. You get it. He is, or was, the great American author of our time, is that The Last of Us basically took this and improved upon it. Last of Us Part 1, not Part 2. Part 2 is trash. Also, I don't like The Last of Us TV show for various reasons. But the Last of Us video game took this. They're like, oh, this is a great story. Let us improve upon it. There's just something about almost like the American road trip, right? Oh, this book, A Little Hatred. This book taught me that if you mess up the ending, your audience isn't coming back. I really enjoyed this book until like the last 15, 20 pages. And there was story choices that I cannot believe that they made. They were so frustrating. Why did you do this? I wanted to read the rest of the series, but it's just not worth it at this point. I lost all my trust in the author in the last 20 pages. Like, that's a lot of book to read and a lot of book to enjoy just to be so turned off that you don't want to go through the rest of the series. So you need to nail your endings or else your audience isn't coming back. Unless they're more forgiving than me. It is too fantastical for me. There's a limit. I think at points it's ridiculous. Santa Claus is in here. Why is Santa Claus in here? Absolutely insane. I think the allegory is too much on the head. Definitely a Lord of the Rings fan. I'm not a big fan of these books. The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is my favorite of the bunch. I couldn't get through the rest of them. I mean, I think I've read several of them and tried with the others, but it's tough, man. It's tough. I can see how this could be someone's favorite book, but it's just, there becomes a point where the world gets too ridiculous. It feels like Imagination Land from South Park, where all these characters just keep popping up and like talking beavers and stuff. Come on. There's no excuse for your book not to be impactful. I think I cried near the end of this book. So these were developed from like unproduced Clone Wars scripts. And I feel like this got retconned in the Disney Star Wars universe, but I don't consider the Disney Star Wars universe real at all. But anyway, it doesn't matter what genre you're in. You really should have an impact on your audience. There's no excuse. You can't just be like, oh, it's genre. It's sci-fi. There's no reason that your book shouldn't be at the level of literary fiction or beyond. I'm not someone who thinks literary fiction is any better than genre. In fact, I prefer genre over literary fiction. But often I'll see people excuse genre by saying, oh, well, I'm not here for literary fiction. I'm just here to have a good time. You can have a good time with your book, but it should still have emotional impacts and should be well written. And this is a very well written book with very hard hitting moments. And I really enjoy it. So give this one a read if you haven't. And of course, let's throw it back. Goosebumps, the Living Dummy collection. What I got from this was that books could be terrifying. I remember reading this when I was in middle school, and I don't remember, what is the name of this doll? Slappy. Slappy was terrifying. Books were scary to me, and that means they can be scary again. And Slappy did it for me when I was reading this during reading periods in 4th, 5th grade, whatever it was. A classic. Kafka on the Shore. This was the first, and I think this is the only Japanese book I've ever read. I really want to read more Japanese books, but there is such a unique tone throughout this, and like you're in a fog, and it's such an interesting feeling that I don't know how much of that is due to the translation and if that is like the original intent of the Japanese. Oh, I think the takeaway from this for me actually is that I hated the first 60 pages of this book, but I pushed through, and that could be dangerous because I would often preach that if you don't like a book, you need to put it down. But everyone said that this book is amazing, and at one point it just clicked, and I love this book. It's so good. So the takeaway from this is that be a little forgiving at the beginning, allow the author to build the story, build the world for you, because it might pay off. But also don't be too lenient. If I was halfway through this book and it still sucked, I'm not reading it anymore. Okay, I hope that made sense. So every book on the shelf that I've read, I have at least one takeaway from. I would have more if I went through my notes or if I looked at my different tagging system in each book. But off the top of my head, I could look at the shelf and I can be like, this is the lesson I took away, or this is the part of the book I enjoyed, or this is what I learned from this book. And if you read a whole book, you'll get at least one thing to take. And that doesn't seem like a lot, but over a lifetime, I mean, if you read 50 books this year, that's 50 new thoughts in your head. And that really adds up. So thanks for watching. Bye.